mentioned Morocco.
Yes, I didn't mention many other countries, actually. You're right.
Yeah. What do you see there?
I don't see a serious threat to the King Mohammed right now, actually. I think Morocco is one of the bright lights in North Africa. I think they've done, I mean, he came in after the father and actually undid a lot of the things, especially on the human rights and side and civil society. He's done a lot. So there will, and of course they do have an extremist minority that supports a very radical form of Islam. But I think King Mohammed's on the right track, and I don't see a serious threat to the country, Morocco. Yes, please.
Two questions, and one is more of a comment. In terms of the Egyptian-Israeli relationship, the way that I see it in the long run, it's much more advantageous to Israel to have peace with the people of Egypt than peace with an autocrat who might be there or might not be there or might change his mind, or because the people as a body it's much harder to change the view of the population than of one person.
I would agree with that, absolutely.
And on my second question is, now Iran is backing the Shia uprising in Bahrain. What if, I don't know if that is even a scenario, the Shia uprising in Syria? Syria being an ally of Iran, who will they back? What are your views on that? And do you even think that without Libya being resolved and the Syrians being inspired by the Libyan uprising against Gaddafi, you see them even having the inspiration to uprise against Bashar al-Assad?
Yeah, I didn't mention Syria either, and again because I don't see an immediate threat in Syria, but I don't rule it out. But the Syrians, of course, are very heavy-handed. I mean, this is not Egypt or Tunisia. We know what the father did to the last uprising. I'm not sure Bashar could do the same. I'm not sure you could do it today. In today's world, it's just hard to see the leveling of two cities as he did in Homs and Hama. On the issue of the Shia uprising, I think really it's I mean, Iran, of course, has reasons to promote such upheaval. But at the same time, I think 80% of the Shia in Bahrain are really Bahrainis, and they're not calling for, an Iranian regime. So so I think the extent of their influence is somewhat limited there. Now, the question you raised about Syria is very interesting because, I'm not so sure that Bashar al-Assad's, the government, as divorced from the people, the government's relationship with Iran is as solid across the board. I think it's a marriage of convenience more than an ideological alliance. And so I think if Iran was to support an uprising against the Alawis in Syria, I think the regime would come down very hard, and it would certainly not be supporting the Iranian meddling. So, it's an interesting question. For example, I think when Ahmadinejad went to Lebanon and was greeted, by the Hezbollah and by the southern Lebanon with such fervor and love and affection, I think Syrians, they weren't exactly very happy with that. They saw, in a way, that the Iranians had overstepped their relationship by going directly to Hezbollah. So it's a very interesting relationship, Syria and Iran.
The special tribunal for Lebanon might be a trigger for anything happening in Syria?
I think with the current situation in Lebanon, I don't know if that is likely to happen, because I think the Lebanese government, there's not even a Lebanese government yet, right? So I think they've basically blunted the effect of a tribunal decision by basically they're not going to accept it. They're not going to embrace it. So, but Lebanon is such a complicated place. Yes, please, go ahead, sir.
2 points. One is on the situation with Libya. I'm concerned when we talk about a civil war in Libya.
Yeah.
I know it's very tribal, but I'm wondering if there is a justification between the East and the West, or is it just the fact of pro-Gaddafi versus anti-Gaddafi? Is there other reasons that could create a civil war within that country between those two sides? That's the first question. Second question involves more domestic politics here in the U.S. I'm very concerned with some of the proposals I've seen in this austerity area coming from congressmen to literally gut the State Department and gut foreign aid, especially to Egypt and other countries. I wondered what kind of legs do these proposals have? Is there enough resentment or enough power base to be able to thwart those things, or do you think that that's going to be a reality coming in the next budget?
Well, to your first question on Libya, I'm certainly not a Libya expert, so I can't tell you with any, intimate knowledge the makeup of the tribal between East and West. From what I do know is it's primarily, at least at this point, pro-Gaddafi, anti-Gaddafi. At the same time, the tribes in Libya have always been at each other's throat. There's not been a lot of consensus among the tribal groups. And of course, Gaddafi has encouraged that. I mean, he's set one against the other on purpose to maintain his legitimacy. So if the situation breaks down into complete civil war, then I think at first you'll see this pro and anti focus on Gaddafi being the main reason for fighting. But then if they got rid of Gaddafi, I think your question would be very legitimate in that will it then break down and be violence among the tribes? And I would guess that is very likely, that the civil war would end up being a tribal civil war and not necessarily just to get rid of Gaddafi. It's possible. Because the problem with Libya, you don't have a concentration of power or opposition groups that can come together and say, we are the legitimate representatives of the majority of Libyans. This is the problem they face now. They don't have that consensus. Yes, I'm sorry, you had your hand up as well.
I think it was
The domestic politics.
Oh, the domestic politics. How could I forget that? I think with what's happening in Egypt and Tunisia, my guess will be that the effort to completely cut foreign aid is not going to go forward, at least not in the dramatic cuts that are being talked about now. In terms of the State Department, you've touched on a very sensitive subject for me for years, because I spent my entire career as a diplomat with the State Department, but then I worked a lot with the military and spent a number of years in the Pentagon. And I can tell you that if we as a nation do not support our diplomatic arm, we will be a nation that is constantly looking at the world through a military prism. And my military colleagues are the first ones to say that. I'm not at all criticizing them, because I think we have a fantastic military. They're professional, they're well educated, they're capable, they're so well funded that they can do things that the State Department only dreams about doing. So I think it would be so short-sighted for this Congress, whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats or both agreeing, if they cut the State Department beyond its existing, in my view, very limited size, it will be a huge disservice to this country in the future. Because, I'll give you an example. I was asked to participate in a policy review of the Middle East when General Petraeus came into the position of CENTCOM commander. And he put together, maybe 200 people to sit down and just go through every single policy we have in his AOR, his area of responsibility. And it was a wonderful intellectual exercise, but a very meaningful one, because he actually took those recommendations and put them into his thinking cap as he took on his new position as CENTCOM commander. Now, the State Department has never had the people or the resources to do something like that as they tackle some of these very complex issues around the world as diplomats. So I think the understaffing of the State Department, the lack of professional training opportunities for Foreign Service officers is a huge problem for the State Department, a huge problem for the country. I think it's a very serious problem. And the State Department doesn't have the constituency that the military does. We don't have bases in every state where we have citizens writing in and supporting that. So the State Department has always had an issue with their funding because of a lack of a broad-based constituency throughout the country. But I think it's a very serious problem.
My question also touches on the domestic situation here. I mean, it seems that, as you say, this is a time where the American government needs to be informed, flexible, and open-minded. And then I read and hear about the hearings being hosted, I guess, by Representative King. And I live in Dubai. I'm traveling around a little bit here, and I'm quite concerned that the level of dialogue, if you can call it dialogue, that I hear in the U.S. seems to be not consistent with the need to be informed and open-minded. So I guess that may not have been a question, but do you have any words of reassurance or?
The only words of reassurance I would have, because these are obviously areas that concern me a great deal. I think in the final analysis in our society, everybody has their say. And my hope is that always in the end, common sense prevails. But it doesn't mean that we don't take risks, because sometimes this type of dialogue really accentuates the lack of information and increases the inability for people to listen. Because I think sometimes what I found when I was overseas and I would come back home, that people had such preconceived concepts that when you spoke to them about their reality, they couldn't hear you, because they had something in their mind and you were challenging that. So I am concerned about a lot of these things that are going on, not only King, but a number of other, I think, very loud voices that are not necessarily adding information, but kind of inflaming emotions rather than adding information. Yeah.